Horror has been breaking down boundaries for decades, and exploitation horror has led the charge.
I'm afraid you're gonna have to start getting scared immediately.
Welcome to WatchMojo's series, Horror History. Horror has gone from being a bump in the night to slaying at the box office. How did it get so huge? Join us as we look at how monster movies, slashers, ghost stories, and more took over our screens. The term exploitation film is a difficult one to nail down. For many, it evokes images of New York City in the 1960s and 70s, specifically the Times Square district and its blocks of grindhouse theaters. Think bold theater marquees and salacious radio ads, teasing forbidden sights and sounds lurking just beyond the theater doors. In essence, though, an exploitation film is one that exploits trends or taboo topics, often made on a low budget and packed with gratuitous sex and violence.
Who's the black private dick that's a sex machine to all the chicks? Shaft! Damn right.
There's a exploitation suffix for nearly any genre you can imagine, from blaxploitation classics like Shaft and Foxy Brown to softcore sexploitation fare like the Emmanuelle series. There's even nunsploitation cinema, if you can believe it. These films pushed the envelope, and it was an international business, with grindhouses importing films from around the world to shock audiences in the States. It was an era before home video, where films often remained in theaters for months due to their immense popularity. Movies with titles like Blackula, Thriller: A Cruel Picture, aka They Call Her One Eye, and Zombie 2 put butts in seats thanks to generous helpings of action, sex, and violence. A thriving scene of dub actors helped movies from countries like Italy, Spain, and France thrill audiences alongside homegrown efforts in the US. It wasn't only in New York City. Exploitation was everywhere, from the combat zone in Boston to the streets of Toronto, Canada. After all, this is a period after the free love 1960s, firmly entrenched in a 1970s me-decade culture. It's a time when society was increasingly open to boundaries being pushed and taboos being broken. Movies could show more than ever before, and show they did. Exploitation horror was made up of a variety of subgenres. There were creature features, there were slashers like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and revenge flicks like 1978's I Spit on Your Grave. And there were splatter films focusing on gore and violence. The first splatter film is generally considered to be Herschel Gordon Lewis's Blood Feast, about a psychopathic food caterer. But it was George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead that really gave the genre momentum, while also establishing the framework for modern zombie movies. In fact, Romero was actually the one who came up with the splatter label when describing the sequel, Dawn of the Dead. There was significant crossover not only between these subgenres, but also between exploitation genres in general. This was especially true when it came to exploitation horror and sexploitation. It's no secret that horror and adult films are some of the movie industry's biggest moneymakers, often used to bankroll other, more mainstream films. Both genres were popular during the exploitation heyday, with the adult films of the era often being just that. Actual films with stories to tell built around explicit scenes. This led to sexploitation horror movies like Vampires and Nude for Satan.
It's not possible.
Well, it is possible. How did you manage to escape, Peter?
Such crossovers also occurred behind the scenes, as in the case of horror icon Wes Craven, who actually got his start working on adult films under the pseudonym Abe Snake. Similarly, William Lustig worked on adult films before directing some classic examples of 80s horror, including the Times Square staple Maniac. Craven's directorial debut, the exploitation horror film The Last House on the Left, even included adult film actor Fred Lincoln in the cast.
How we get into this sex bar business anyway? My brother Saul, a plumber. He makes twice as much money as me and gets 3 weeks vacation, too.
Before filming, Craven and producer Sean S. Cunningham, who would go on to direct Friday the 13th, had actually planned for it to be a hardcore film, although the idea was later dropped. Still, it shows how porous and permissive the boundaries were, a point demonstrated again a few years later when adult actress Marilyn Chambers scored the lead in David Cronenberg's horror classic, Rabid.
Do you mind if I get in with you? I've been lying in bed for so long. My body aches all over.
Sex sells, but the element to be exploited could really be just about anything.
Help me.
Italy had a wild run of cannibal films that exploited the gory special effects market throughout the late 70s into the 80s, with Cannibal Holocaust and Cannibal Ferox, aka Make Them Die Slowly, enjoying a tremendously successful run in US theaters. Cannibal Holocaust has been recognized as a pioneer of the found footage genre, 2 decades before the Blair Witch Project revitalized the genre in 1999.
In spite of what Mike says now, it is my fault. Because it was my project. And I insisted. I insisted on everything.
The flexible nature of these films went hand in hand with the fact that often, exploitation producers would offer rookie directors plenty of creative freedom, as long as the required exploitable element was there in the final product. This was especially true of films released by producer Roger Corman. Corman gave many future Hollywood A-listers their start in the business, including Francis Ford Coppola, Joe Dante with Piranha, and composer James Horner, who wrote the score for the gloriously trashy monster romp Humanoids from the Deep. Corman's empire was an assembly line of movies meant for the grindhouse and drive-in markets. This idea of quick and cheap never went away, and exploitation cinema continues to influence modern directors. Tarantino and Rodriguez's 2007 double feature Grindhouse, combining Planet Terror and Death Proof, is a love letter to exploitation cinema. So are the fake trailers from directors Rob Zombie, Edgar Wright, Eli Roth, and Jason Eisner. Roth's The Green Inferno is similarly an homage to Italian cannibal films. Filmmakers like Roth are also connected to the torture porn genre, the modern-day term for splatter films. Together with directors like Rodriguez, Zombie, James Wan, and Lee Winnell, Roth is part of the Splat Pack, whose films are often shot on low budgets and feature ultra-violence. Movies like Wan and Winnell's Saw are still selling shock, and audiences are only too happy to oblige.
I want to play a game.
Since the first Saw film was released in 2004, the franchise has grown to 9 installments.
You have a choice. Scream or don't.
Meanwhile, the business model of production companies such as Blumhouse harkens back to that exploitation philosophy of keeping budgets low and profits high.
I'm afraid the problem with having it all is that usually other people want to take it.
For every fantasy island that might underperform, there are entries like Happy Death Day or The Invisible Man that get positive attention from fans and critics. At the heart of exploitation horror is a delicate balance between art and commerce. It's a world that's full of talented dreamers and shameless hucksters, of business people and artists. There's always something for sale and a product to be made. At the same time, however, this world brought us some of the most daring, shocking, and, yes, entertaining films of all time.
Well, adios!
Make sure to tune in for our next episode of Horror History, where we'll be talking slashers.